Mom's sick, so I came to work in her place. What the Mafia Boss did next left everyone speechless. What could happen after someone says those simple words? And why would what the Mafia Boss did leave everyone speechless? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy heartfelt stories filled with emotion, dignity, and unforgettable moments, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Thank you for being here and for supporting our growing community with every view, like, and kind comment. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what would you do if you had to step into a loved one's place during their hardest moment? Now, settle in, and let's begin a story where one ordinary decision changes everything. Some people walk into a mansion looking for a paycheck, never realizing they are about to walk into the moment that will change their lives forever. The DeLuca estate stood like a monument above the Hudson River, its limestone walls glowing beneath the pale gold light of an early autumn morning. Luxury lived in every detail, from the perfectly trimmed hedges to the polished black iron gates that quietly separated unimaginable wealth from the ordinary world outside. Every employee knew the rules before stepping through those gates. Arrive on time. Speak only when necessary. Never attract attention. Most importantly, never give Lorenzo DeLuca a reason to remember your face. At exactly 6:45 a.m., a city bus stopped nearly half a mile away, and a young woman stepped onto the sidewalk carrying an old canvas lunch bag and a neatly folded housekeeping uniform. Her name was Ava Carter, 28 years old, with warm brown skin, tired eyes that hadn't enjoyed a full night's sleep in weeks, and the quiet determination of someone who had learned long ago that life rarely paused to make things easier. She adjusted the worn strap on her shoulder before looking down at the small envelope tucked safely inside her jacket pocket. It contained hospital paperwork, unpaid bills, and a handwritten note from her mother that simply read, "Don't worry about me. I'll be back at work soon." Ava smiled sadly because they both knew that wasn't true. Her mother, Evelyn Carter, had spent 23 years cleaning rooms inside the DeLuca estate. She had polished its marble floors, dusted priceless paintings, and quietly disappeared into the background every single day. But yesterday morning, a sudden illness had sent her to the hospital instead of the employee shuttle, and before dawn today, Ava had made a decision that felt both terrifying and unavoidable. She would take her mother's place, even if only for one day. As she approached the security gate, the guard studied the unfamiliar face before glancing at the employee roster. "Name?" he asked politely. "Ava Carter," she answered, taking a steady breath. "Mom's sick, so I came to work in her place." The words were simple, spoken without drama or expectation, yet something about them lingered in the crisp morning air. The guard recognized Evelyn's last name immediately. His expression softened for only a second before professionalism returned. After a brief phone call, the heavy gates slowly opened. Ava thanked him and walked inside, unaware that dozens of security cameras quietly tracked every movement across the property. Inside the main residence, preparations for another busy day had already begun. Housekeepers organized carts, chefs prepared breakfast, gardeners tended flower beds that looked almost too perfect to be real. Ava kept her eyes lowered, determined not to slow anyone down. She listened carefully as the head housekeeper assigned her familiar cleaning routes that her mother had described countless times over family dinners. Every room carried echoes of stories she had heard growing up, yet standing inside them felt entirely different. Everything seemed larger, quieter, and somehow heavier. Then, without warning, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations faded. Footsteps slowed. Across the grand entrance hall, Lorenzo DeLuca entered the mansion wearing a tailored charcoal suit, his calm expression revealing almost nothing. Employees instinctively stepped aside, offering respectful greetings before returning to their work. Ava did the same, never lifting her eyes long enough to study him. She believed she had passed unnoticed. She was wrong. As Lorenzo continued walking toward his private office, he paused almost imperceptibly, not because of her face, not because she had spoken, but because one sentence had reached him with unexpected clarity. "Mom's sick, so I came to work in her place." For reasons even he couldn't explain, those words stayed with him long after he disappeared behind the carved oak doors, while somewhere inside the vast estate, The first quiet thread of an extraordinary story had already begun to unfold. Ava quickly learned that invisibility inside the DeLuca estate was not achieved by hiding, but by becoming part of a rhythm that had existed long before she arrived. Every clock seemed perfectly synchronized, every hallway carried quiet purpose, and every employee moved with practiced precision that came only from years of discipline. She followed the senior housekeeper, Mrs. Linda Harris, through corridors lined with oil paintings and crystal chandeliers that reflected the morning light across polished marble floors. Linda handed her a neatly organized cleaning cart before offering a gentle smile. Your mother always left every room better than she found it. Do not worry about being perfect today. Just do your best. Those simple words eased a weight Ava had been carrying since sunrise. She nodded gratefully and began working exactly as her mother had taught her years ago. Dust first, glass second, floors last. Never rush. Never cut corners. Every small task was a reflection of respect for the people who would enter the room later. As she wiped fingerprints from a library window overlooking the river, she remembered being 8 years old, sitting at their tiny kitchen table while Evelyn folded laundry after long shifts. Her mother had often said that dignity was not measured by the title on a business card, but by the care a person put into ordinary work when nobody was watching. Those lessons had become part of Ava long before she understood their value. Around noon, she noticed one of the older kitchen assistants struggling to carry 2 heavy boxes of fresh produce toward the pantry. Without hesitating, Ava quietly stepped forward and lifted one of the boxes onto her own shoulder. Thank you, sweetheart, the woman said with an exhausted smile. These stairs get steeper every year. Ava laughed softly. Then we will climb them together. She never realized someone standing on the second-floor balcony had witnessed the entire exchange. Lorenzo DeLuca had paused outside his private office after concluding a meeting, his attention briefly drawn not by the conversation below, but by the absence of one. The young woman did not help because anyone asked her to. She did not glance around to see whether someone was watching. She simply noticed another person needed help and acted as though kindness required no audience. Lorenzo remained silent for another moment before continuing down the hallway, yet he found himself thinking about something unusual. Most new employees spent their first day trying to impress supervisors. This woman seemed interested only in making everyone else's day a little easier. Later that afternoon, Ava entered one of the guest suites to straighten the furniture after a business luncheon. On a small side table rested an expensive fountain pen that had rolled dangerously close to the edge. She carefully placed it back into its holder before continuing her work without giving it another thought. A few minutes later, an executive assistant rushed into the room searching anxiously for the pen, explaining that it belonged to an important client and had sentimental value. When she discovered it safely where Ava had placed it, relief washed across her face. You probably saved me from a very difficult afternoon, she admitted. Ava simply smiled and returned to folding fresh towels with the same quiet focus she had shown all morning. Across the estate, people began mentioning the new woman who had arrived in Evelyn Carter's place. Not because she spoke often, not because she stood out. Quite the opposite. She listened more than she talked, thanked everyone regardless of position, and treated every task as though it mattered. By the time the afternoon sunlight stretched across the mansion's grand windows, Lorenzo had heard her name 3 separate times from 3 different employees, each telling a completely different story that somehow revealed the same uncommon truth. Without realizing it, Ava Carter had done something that almost no one accomplished on their first day inside the DeLuca estate. She had earned respect without ever asking for it. A quiet reputation has a strange way of traveling faster than the loudest introduction. By the second morning, Ava Carter no longer felt like a visitor wandering through unfamiliar hallways. She still checked every room assignment twice and still carried herself with careful humility, but the nervous uncertainty that had followed her through the front gates had slowly given way to steady confidence. She greeted every employee by name whenever she could remember it, thanked the kitchen staff for every cup of coffee they offered, and quietly stayed a few extra minutes whenever another housekeeper fell behind. Nobody instructed her to do those things. They simply felt natural. During her lunch break, instead of sitting in the bright employee dining room, Ava stepped outside to a small stone bench overlooking the estate gardens. She opened the same canvas lunch bag she had carried from home. Inside was a simple turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper, a small apple, and a reusable bottle of water. Before taking her first bite, she pulled out her phone and smiled when the hospital answered through a video call. Evelyn appeared on the screen wearing a pale blue hospital gown, her tired face brightening the instant she saw her daughter. "How was your first real day?" she asked softly. Ava looked around to make sure nobody was listening before answering. "Better than I expected. Everyone has been kind." Evelyn studied her daughter's face for a moment and immediately recognized the fatigue hidden behind the smile. "You barely slept again." Ava laughed gently. "You raised me too well. Mothers always know." Evelyn reached for the blanket across her lap. "Promise me something. If this becomes too much, you will walk away. A job can be replaced." "You cannot." Ava nodded, although deep inside she knew she would stay as long as necessary. The hospital bills sitting on the bedside table were impossible to ignore. Insurance covered only part of the treatment, and every additional day away from work created another financial burden neither of them discussed aloud. They ended the call with matching smiles, each pretending to be stronger than they actually felt. As Ava returned inside, she noticed a maintenance worker kneeling beside a supply cart with dozens of cleaning products scattered across the hallway floor after a broken wheel had collapsed beneath the weight. Without saying a word, she knelt beside him and began organizing every bottle by size before helping him transfer the supplies onto another cart. "You do not have to help," the man said with an embarrassed grin. "I know," Ava replied warmly, "but it will go faster if there are two of us." At nearly the same moment, Lorenzo DeLuca stepped out of a nearby conference room after finishing a discussion with legal advisors. His attention drifted toward the quiet scene unfolding at the end of the corridor. Nobody had called for assistance. Nobody appeared frustrated or impatient. The young woman simply treated another employee's inconvenience as though it were her own responsibility. Lorenzo continued walking without interrupting, but something about her behavior unsettled an assumption he had carried for years. In his experience, genuine character rarely revealed itself during important meetings or carefully prepared interviews. It revealed itself during ordinary moments when nobody expected recognition. That afternoon, he asked his executive assistant a simple question. "How long has Evelyn Carter worked here?" She checked the employee records before answering. 23 years, sir. Excellent attendance. No disciplinary reports. She has always been one of the most dependable members of the housekeeping team." Lorenzo remained silent for several seconds before asking another question. "And her daughter?" "Only 2 days, sir." He closed the file without another word, yet his thoughts remained unusually occupied. Somewhere inside the enormous mansion, surrounded by polished marble, priceless artwork, and extraordinary wealth, a young woman who possessed almost nothing continued leaving behind something far more difficult to earn than admiration. She was quietly building trust, one unnoticed act of kindness at a time. The longer Lorenzo DeLuca observed without being noticed, the more difficult it became to fit Ava Carter into the assumptions he usually made about new employees. By the end of her third day, he had already witnessed enough small moments to understand that nothing about her kindness appeared rehearsed. She never searched the room before helping someone, never paused to calculate whether a gesture might benefit her, and never seemed aware that her quiet habits were becoming the subject of conversation throughout the estate. Early that Thursday morning, a shipment of fresh flowers arrived for a charity dinner scheduled later that evening. One of the delivery drivers accidentally left several heavy containers near the entrance, forcing the reception staff to maneuver around them while welcoming guests and vendors. Before anyone asked for assistance, Ava carefully rolled up the sleeves of her housekeeping uniform, carried each container into the conservatory, and arranged them exactly where the florist requested. When the florist thanked her, Ava simply smiled and said, "Everyone is trying to finish their job. Mine is easier if yours goes well too." Those words stayed with the florist long after Ava disappeared down another hallway. Upstairs, Lorenzo stood beside the tall windows of his private office reviewing financial reports. His chief operations manager entered with a folder containing updates on the evening event, but before leaving, she added an unexpected observation. "There is something unusual about Evelyn Carter's daughter." Lorenzo looked up without speaking. "She has solved 3 small problems this week before anyone even reported them. People seem calmer when she is nearby." Lorenzo closed the folder in front of him. Has anyone offered her special treatment? No, sir. Good. His answer came almost automatically, yet after she left, he remained standing in thoughtful silence. Throughout his career, he had learned that extraordinary character rarely announced itself through grand achievements. More often, it revealed itself through consistency, especially when no reward was expected. Later that afternoon, rain clouds rolled across the Hudson, darkening the sky until the estate seemed wrapped in silver light. Employees hurried indoors carrying equipment from the gardens before the storm arrived. Ava noticed one of the younger groundskeepers struggling to cover newly planted flowers before the first drops fell. Although her own schedule was already behind, she quietly borrowed an extra tarp and helped him protect the fragile plants. By the time they finished, both of them were damp from the light rain. You are going to get in trouble for falling behind, the young man said apologetically. Ava brushed a raindrop from her forehead and smiled. Flowers do not know whose department they belong to. The answer made him laugh for the first time all day. Minutes later, Ava returned inside and continued cleaning as though nothing unusual had happened. She never mentioned the delay, never explained the reason, and never asked for understanding. That evening, Linda Harris reviewed the housekeeping checklist and noticed that despite helping others throughout the day, Ava had still completed every assignment without leaving a single detail unfinished. She quietly shook her head with admiration. She works exactly like her mother, Linda whispered to herself. Across the mansion, Lorenzo received one final update before leaving for the evening. It was not about profits, contracts, or business opportunities. It was a simple note from his operations manager stating that employee morale had noticeably improved during the week, with several staff members specifically mentioning Ava Carter's willingness to help wherever she was needed. Lorenzo set the report aside and looked through the rain-speckled window toward the illuminated pathways below. Wealth had taught him many lessons, but moments like these reminded him that influence often arrived wearing ordinary clothes. For the first time in many years, he found himself wondering whether the smallest person inside the largest house might quietly become the one everyone would remember. Sometimes the truth waits quietly behind a closed door, revealing itself only when someone finally decides to look beyond appearances. Friday arrived with clear skies stretching across the Hudson, and the DeLuca estate returned to its familiar rhythm after the previous evening's rain. The charity dinner had been a success, guests had departed, and employees resumed their daily routines before sunrise. Ava moved from room to room with the same calm focus she had shown since her first morning, but beneath her composed expression, exhaustion had begun settling into her shoulders. During a short break, she slipped outside to call the hospital once again. This time her smile faded as soon as the nurse answered. Evelyn's treatment had gone well, but additional tests were now necessary before the doctors could determine when she could safely return home. Ava thanked the nurse, promised she would visit after work, and quietly ended the call before anyone could hear the tremble in her voice. She folded the updated billing statement into her pocket without looking at the total. There would be time to worry later. For now, there were windows to polish, linens to replace, and another full day waiting inside the mansion. Unaware that she had dropped a small receipt near the garden entrance, Ava hurried back inside, carrying fresh towels toward the guest wing. Several minutes later, Lorenzo crossed the same stone pathway while speaking with his estate manager about upcoming renovations. As they walked, a folded piece of paper caught his attention against the gray pavement. He bent down almost absent-mindedly and picked it up. It was not a shopping receipt or a grocery list. It was part of a hospital payment summary bearing Evelyn Carter's name, along with several outstanding balances and the next scheduled treatment date. Lorenzo looked at the paper for a long moment before quietly folding it again. He did not comment, and he did not ask questions. Instead, he handed the document to his assistant. "Find Ava Carter," he said calmly. "Return this to her. Tell her she dropped it. Nothing more." 20 minutes later, the assistant found Ava replacing fresh flowers in the east hallway. Embarrassment instantly crossed her face when she realized what she had lost. "Thank you," she whispered, carefully placing the receipt back inside her pocket. "I did not even notice." She expected questions that never came. The assistant simply smiled politely and walked away. Later that afternoon, Lorenzo requested Evelyn Carter's employee file, not because he doubted her, but because he wanted to understand the family whose quiet integrity had begun changing the atmosphere inside his home. The records told a simple story. 23 years of dependable service. Perfect attendance except for verified medical emergencies. Positive evaluations every year. No complaints. No disciplinary actions. No requests for special favors. Beside the file rested a recent insurance statement indicating that medical coverage had reached its annual limit. Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, his thoughtful expression softening almost imperceptibly. He had spent years evaluating businesses, contracts, and investments. Yet this folder spoke more clearly than any financial report. A mother had worked faithfully for more than 2 decades without asking for recognition, and now her daughter carried that same quiet strength without asking for sympathy. Through the office window, Lorenzo watched employees crossing the courtyard below. Among them, Ava walked with the same steady pace as always, greeting others with a warm smile that revealed nothing about the worries hidden inside her pocket. At that moment, he understood something that no report could measure. Character was not inherited through wealth. Sometimes it was passed from one generation to the next through sacrifice, humility, and the simple decision to keep showing up even when life became unbearably difficult. And for the first time since Ava had entered the DeLuca estate, Lorenzo realized that helping her family was no longer merely an act of generosity. It had quietly become a matter of honor. The greatest tests of character rarely arrive wearing the name of a test. They appear disguised as ordinary moments that seem too small to matter. On Monday morning, the DeLuca estate prepared for an important gathering of business leaders and community partners. Every room had to be flawless before the first. Guests arrived. Linda Harris carefully assigned additional responsibilities to the housekeeping team, apologizing that everyone would need to work a little harder than usual. Ava accepted the extra list without hesitation. She simply smiled, organized her supplies, and began moving through the mansion with the same steady pace that had already become familiar to everyone around her. Lorenzo watched the preparations from the second-floor gallery before quietly speaking to his operations manager. "Do not change anyone's schedule," he instructed. "Let today unfold naturally." The manager nodded, unaware that Lorenzo was observing far more than the readiness of the estate. Throughout the morning, small inconveniences appeared one after another. A breakfast tray was accidentally delivered to the wrong conference room. Ava noticed the mistake before anyone complained and calmly carried it to the correct location without mentioning who had made the error. An elderly electrician struggled to reach a storage cabinet while balancing a heavy toolbox. Ava held the ladder steady until he finished, then wished him a pleasant day before returning to her own work. Later, a newly hired housekeeper accidentally spilled a basket of freshly folded linens across the hallway. The young employee looked terrified, convinced she had ruined her first week. Ava knelt beside her without a single word of criticism and quietly helped fold every towel again. "Everyone has a first week," she said with a reassuring smile. "You are doing better than you think." The young woman blinked back grateful tears before whispering, "Thank you." None of these moments lasted more than a few minutes. None seemed important enough to become part of anyone's report. Yet Lorenzo noticed a pattern growing clearer with every passing hour. Ava never measured people by their position. She treated executives, gardeners, chefs, receptionists, and maintenance workers with exactly the same respect. Shortly after lunch, Linda approached Ava with concern. "You have not taken your afternoon break." Ava glanced at the clock and realized nearly 6 hours had passed. She laughed softly. "I guess I forgot." Linda handed her a bottle of water. "Your mother always forgot too." The words warmed Ava's heart. She stepped outside for a few quiet minutes beneath the shade of an old maple tree before taking out her phone. Another message from the hospital appeared. Her mother's condition was stable, but additional medication would increase the remaining balance. Ava closed her eyes briefly, took a slow breath, and slipped the phone back into her pocket. When she returned inside, nobody would have guessed she had received difficult news. She greeted everyone with the same calm kindness as before. From the library window above, Lorenzo watched her re-enter the mansion with composed determination. He had expected that pressure might eventually reveal frustration, resentment, or self-pity. Instead, every challenge seemed to deepen her patience rather than diminish it. By late afternoon, he no longer believed he was merely observing a dependable employee. He was witnessing someone whose quiet strength had been shaped long before she ever crossed the gates of his estate. As the final preparations came to an end and the mansion settled into perfect order, Lorenzo made a decision without announcing it to anyone. The time for silent observation was almost over. Very soon, he would step forward himself, and when he did, nothing about Ava Carter's future would remain the same. True generosity often chooses silence long before it chooses recognition. The following morning, the DeLuca estate awakened beneath a sky washed clean by the cool breeze coming off the Hudson River. Inside the mansion, employees prepared for another busy day, unaware that several quiet decisions had already been set into motion before sunrise. Lorenzo arrived earlier than usual and invited the director of human resources, the estate accountant, and his executive assistant into a brief private meeting. He asked only a handful of questions. How much unused employee assistance funding remained for the year? Whether Evelyn Carter's health insurance could legally be expanded through the estate's long service program. Whether there were educational opportunities available for immediate family members of longtime employees. No one in the room understood why those questions suddenly mattered, but everyone understood that when Lorenzo spoke calmly, every detail deserved careful attention. Within an hour, the necessary paperwork had begun moving through the proper channels without Ava's knowledge. Meanwhile, she started another ordinary shift believing nothing had changed. She carefully dusted bookshelves in the West Library, refreshed fresh flowers throughout the guest wing, and greeted every co-worker with the same quiet warmth that had become part of the estate's daily rhythm. Shortly before noon, Linda Harris approached her carrying a sealed envelope. "The accounting office asked me to give you this," she said. Ava looked confused. "Did I make a mistake on my paperwork?" Linda smiled gently. "Open it later. I think they simply need your signature for something." Ava thanked her and slipped the envelope into her apron pocket without opening it. There were still rooms waiting to be cleaned, and she preferred finishing her responsibilities before worrying about documents. During her lunch break beneath the familiar maple tree, she finally unfolded the papers. The first page explained that, based on Evelyn Carter's years of service, the estate had approved an expanded employee medical support benefit covering a significant portion of her remaining hospital expenses. The second page offered temporary paid family medical leave protections, ensuring Evelyn's position would remain secure throughout her recovery. The third page informed Ava that she qualified for a professional development scholarship sponsored by the DeLuca Foundation should she wish to continue her education in hospitality management or business administration. Ava read every page twice, convinced she had misunderstood something. Her hands trembled slightly as tears gathered in her eyes. There was no dramatic announcement, no signature from Lorenzo across the top, and no explanation beyond a single sentence printed near the bottom. In recognition of faithful service and commitment to the DeLuca estate community, Ava quietly pressed the papers against her chest before looking toward the bright afternoon sky. For the first time in weeks, the weight she had carried inside seemed just a little lighter. She immediately called the hospital. When Evelyn answered, Ava struggled to keep her voice steady as she explained what had happened. Silence filled the phone for several long seconds before her mother whispered, "After all these years, I never expected anyone to remember us like this." Ava smiled through grateful tears. Someone did. Neither of them knew exactly who had made it happen, but both understood that kindness this thoughtful never appeared by accident. From the second-floor window overlooking the gardens, Lorenzo watched Ava end the call with quiet gratitude instead of celebration. She did not run through the halls telling everyone the news. She did not seek attention. She simply folded the papers carefully, returned them to the envelope, wiped away the remaining tears, and walked back inside ready to finish the rest of her work. In that simple moment, Lorenzo realized his decision had accomplished far more than easing one family's burden. It had confirmed something he had already begun to believe. Some people deserved opportunities not because they asked for them, but because their character had quietly earned them long before anyone was paying attention. By the end of the week, something invisible had changed inside the DeLuca estate. It was not the polished marble floors or the perfectly arranged gardens. It was the people. Employees who had once hurried through their routines now exchanged warmer greetings. Conversations carried more laughter. Small acts of kindness seemed to spread naturally from one person to another, as though generosity had quietly become contagious. Ava noticed the difference, but assumed everyone was simply relieved that Evelyn's health was improving. She never imagined that many of those changes had begun because people had been inspired by her example. Late Friday afternoon, Linda Harris asked the entire household staff to gather in the main reception hall before the evening shift began. Such meetings were uncommon, and whispers quickly filled the room as housekeepers, chefs, gardeners, maintenance workers, receptionists, and office assistants stood together beneath the grand chandelier. Ava quietly joined the back of the group, hoping to remain unnoticed. Moments later, Lorenzo DeLuca entered the hall. The quiet conversation stopped instantly. He looked across the assembled employees, not with distance or authority alone, but with thoughtful appreciation. Before everyone returns to work, he began calmly. There is something I believe deserves to be acknowledged. No one moved. The room seemed to hold its breath. Lorenzo continued. For many years, this estate has depended on people whose names are rarely spoken outside these walls. They arrive before sunrise, leave after long days, and perform their work with professionalism that cannot be replaced. Several longtime employees exchanged surprised glances. Lorenzo rarely addressed the staff personally. His eyes slowly found Ava standing near the back. Recently, I was reminded that character is measured less by titles than by daily choices. Helping without being asked. Respecting every person equally. Carrying responsibility without expecting recognition. Ava lowered her eyes, convinced he was speaking generally. Then Lorenzo took a few steps forward. Ava Carter. The sound of her name echoed gently through the hall. She looked up, visibly startled. Every employee turned toward her. Please come forward. Her heart raced as she carefully walked through the silent crowd. She stopped several feet away, uncertain whether she had done something wrong. Lorenzo offered a reassuring smile that immediately eased the tension in the room. Your mother has served this estate with honor for 23 years. During the short time you have been here, you have honored that same tradition through your own actions. Ava blinked in surprise. She had never expected anyone to notice the countless ordinary moments that had simply felt like the right thing to do. Lorenzo continued speaking, his voice steady and sincere. Many people believe leadership begins with authority. I disagree. Leadership begins the moment someone chooses kindness even when nobody is watching. Complete silence filled the hall. Several employees quietly wiped away tears. Linda smiled proudly, remembering Evelyn teaching the exact same values to younger staff years earlier. Lorenzo turned toward the assembled team once more. Every person in this house deserves respect, not because of position, but because of character. Ava reminded all of us of that truth. The words settled deeply over the room. There was no applause at first, only a profound stillness as everyone absorbed what had just happened. Then, almost naturally, one employee began clapping. Another joined. Within seconds, the entire hall filled with warm applause that was not loud with excitement, but rich with genuine gratitude. Ava stood speechless, overwhelmed not by attention itself, but by the realization that the quiet lessons her mother had taught around a small kitchen table had reached far beyond their modest home. At that moment, she finally understood that true dignity never demanded to be noticed. It simply lived so faithfully that, sooner or later, the world could not help but recognize it. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling it created lingered throughout the mansion long after everyone returned to work. No one spoke quite as loudly as before. No one hurried past another employee without offering a smile or a greeting. It was as though every person inside the DeLuca estate had been reminded that the value of a human being could never be measured by a title, a paycheck, or the office they occupied. Ava quietly resumed her duties exactly as she had every day before. She polished the final windows overlooking the gardens, organized the housekeeping supplies, and thanked Linda Harris before preparing to leave for the hospital. Nothing about her routine changed, because she had never acted kindly in hopes of receiving recognition. As she stepped toward the front entrance carrying her familiar canvas lunch bag, she heard someone call her name one last time. She turned to find Lorenzo DeLuca standing near the grand staircase. There were no executives beside him, no assistants holding folders, and no audience waiting to witness the conversation. Only the fading afternoon sunlight stretched across the marble floor between them. Ava approached respectfully. Sir, Lorenzo handed her a simple cream-colored envelope. "This belongs to you." She accepted it carefully, unsure what to expect. Inside was an official employment letter offering her a permanent position at the estate with full benefits, flexible scheduling while her mother recovered, and enrollment in the professional development program the following semester. A handwritten note rested on top of the documents. It read, "Your mother spent 23 years helping this house stand with dignity. Now it is our turn to stand beside your family." Ava looked up, her eyes filling with grateful tears. "I do not know how to thank you." Lorenzo smiled gently. "You already have. Every day you walked through these doors, you reminded people that kindness is a form of leadership. That is something no business can purchase and no position can guarantee." Ava lowered her eyes for a moment before answering softly. "Everything I know, my mother taught me." Lorenzo nodded. "Then she raised someone remarkable." Later that evening, Ava arrived at the hospital carrying flowers she had picked from a small neighborhood market on her way there. Evelyn looked stronger than she had only a few days before. When Ava placed the employment letter beside her mother's bed, Evelyn read every page slowly, pausing several times as quiet tears rolled down her cheeks. She reached for her daughter's hand and held it tightly. "I always worried that my work would be forgotten the day I stopped coming through those gates," she whispered. Ava squeezed her hand and smiled. "It was never forgotten. It was growing inside me all along." Outside the hospital window, the city lights gradually illuminated the evening skyline, each one shining with quiet purpose against the darkening sky. Across town, the DeLuca estate continued its familiar rhythm, but something lasting had changed within its walls. Employees greeted one another with greater warmth. New workers quickly learned that respect was expected in every direction. Managers began noticing not only performance but compassion. The smallest acts of consideration slowly became part of the estate's culture because one young woman had shown that extraordinary character could be revealed through the simplest choices. Lorenzo often reflected on that week whenever he passed the east hallway where he had first noticed Ava. The memory reminded him that true influence did not begin with power. It began with paying attention to people whose goodness quietly transformed the lives around them. And long after the paperwork had been filed, the hospital bills had been paid, and Evelyn had finally returned home to recover surrounded by peace. Everyone who had witnessed those days remembered the same lesson. The strongest foundations are not built from marble, wealth, or status. They are built by ordinary people who choose compassion when no one is asking for it. And on that unforgettable week, an entire house remembered what dignity truly looked like.